Okay.
The very beginning.
A very good place to start.
Once we're a little girl, you lived in Danbury.
That is
No
true.
pressure though, Mom.
And what is this all about?
That is
That's a microphone.
You know,
That is the microphone.
it's interesting. Do your old folks ever get intimidated when you pull out the microphone?
I don't know.
That you interview?
Sometimes you just kind of.
Yeah, you just kind of.
The fortunate thing about it is it doesn't
It
look
looks
much.
kinda
It doesn't
goofy.
look
What
much
is
like
it?
a microphone. So, if it were a regular kind of handheld thing, it gets people
There
more
you go.
nervous than something that doesn't really look like. You know.
So,
you were born
My
in
name
Danbury.
is-
You were born in Danbury. You were the last of 5 kids. Your parents were 40 when they had you. Something. They were a little older, right? You weren't.
okay.
They
Well,
weren't 40.
are you starting? In other words, is your voice being picked up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I'm Barbara McDonald. Otherwise, Barbara Hubbard.
No, look at us. You don't need to look at
Oh, you don't have to look at you?
No.
No, just have a conversation. Just pretend
Okay.
it's not there.
Well, when were you born?
I was born February 9th, 1932.
32. Wow. Right
So I'm
into
74.
the Depression then.
Yeah, but of course, as a baby, you don't know that.
No, no. Had that affected your family at all?
Oh, yes, definitely. My father was always a hard worker. And because his family was not, well, they were poor. They were poor.
His family, or do you mean your family?
No, I mean my father's family. In other
Okay.
words, as he was growing up. His father, Grandpa Hubbard, was a farmer in Maryland. And
Have you raised corn or tobacco? Did you hear what?
I don't even know what
Little
he
family
was
farm
raised.
then,
Yeah,
yeah.
little family farm.
So your dad grew up in Maryland.
Now, excuse me, Teresa.
Your dad grew up in Maryland?
Yeah, on the Eastern Shore. Now, in reading your book, I haven't read all of it, but in reading your
Okay.
book and reading about the sharecropping,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if maybe my grandfather might have been a sharecropper. It was the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
Sure. There's a lot of people there.
And I don't know for sure, but that might have been what was going on. Anyway, my father was the oldest of 5 children. So, probably, which I didn't appreciate until later when I thought about it, probably
Hello?
his father felt very,
Carolyn.
you know, Henry was, my father's name is Henry, Henry Hubbard. And as the oldest son, as a matter of fact, it was all girls after that.
Oh, Henry was the oldest?
Yes, was 5 children, and was was Henry, and then I think it was 3 daughters, and then much later a son who actually died of diabetes.
Oh.
And when now this was much later, but Raymond Hubbard, and he was only 16. And by the time the doctors knew that he had diabetes, it was too late to do anything about it. That would have probably been about the same year I was born, in the 30s. Because I didn't. My older brother Bob told me about Raymond, and my brother Bob always said how wonderful, what a nice guy Raymond was. So, anyway, all right. Now there's my father in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and apparently there's other relatives there who were. I guess you were all farmers back in those days.
Sure.
Because that would have been right around the First World War, 1917, I think it was. And simultaneously, my mother was from Brooklyn, New York. She has relatives down there too. So she's down there. Somehow those 2 families knew each other.
Your mom was an orphan, I thought.
Well, I'll correct that.
Well, that's later, okay.
Okay, so my mother, well, she was not an orphan. It was just, in fact, I was explaining this to Mark. She was raised by her aunt and uncle. In fact, Kathy, I have the book that her uncle Edmund gave her on her 8th birthday, which would be 1902 or something like that. And I have the book with me, which I think is awesome. Anyway, so Mother was down in the same area with her relatives, her sister, whoever. And we always loved, Florence and I always loved this story because apparently these families were nearby. So Cecilia, my mother, somebody said, you know, in all this visiting back and forth, have you met Henry? Henry? Yes, oh, you have to meet Henry. So they went out to the strawberry patch, and the story that we always heard was that Henry's, you know, my father, is down there bent over and he's doing whatever with the strawberries. And my mother, she's walking down with some other relative, and this is Henry. And I guess they were both a little shy. My mother was more bold. And so she kind of kissed him. How did she do that?
She kissed him.
Wow.
And he was bent over. And she kind of kissed him on the top of his head. Hello, Henry. My mother was always mischievous. And
Was she a teenager at the time?
actually, when they got married, she was 20. She was 23 and he was 20. And but anyway, that's how she first met him.
Strawberry
That's
patch
And obviously,
cute.
and then
in Maryland.
I think she, you know, in the strawberry patch, and I think she kissed him on the forehead or whatever she did.
cute.
But obviously, that must have really.
Yeah, well, that'd make an impression on me.
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty girl comes along, kisses you.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
strawberry field, man. That's, you
Yeah.
know.
Did she have red hair? Your mom?
I don't. No,
She
I
had
think
reddish hair.
possibly because
Yeah.
my oldest brother, well, the oldest two members of the family had
That's Florence,
girls,
right?
had
Yeah. Well, Florence hair
Red.
is black, but
Really?
Betty,
I thought Florence had red hair.
no. Florence,
yes, her daughter Lorraine has red.
no, honey. Florence has always had mildly reddish hair.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
My mistake.
But anyway, staying with that. So obviously Henry, my father, must have thought, yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
assuming that because he was a
Sure.
quiet guy. He was always kind of quiet and shy.
Yeah.
So they started dating, and of course at that point, this would be back in the beginning of the last century, so you went out in a horse and buggy. And the story that was also, everybody laughed, and my mother laughed at herself on this. They were going along cloppity-clop with the horse and buggy, and Mother said to Dad, "Oh, I hear a waterfall. Can we go see it?" Well, it wasn't a waterfall. It was it was a horse or a cow or something doing his thing in the nearby field, and we all laughed about that. She thought it was a waterfall. So
And she was from Brooklyn, so she was not as
Oh, yeah.
familiar with
Oh, yeah.
the nature.
oh yeah, exactly. She was raised
Now,
in Brooklyn.
how much older was Betty than you? When was Betty?
Betty was 14 years old when I was born.
Okay, so let's see. You're born in 32, so Betty was born in 1960. So when
No, because obviously they
1918.
18. Yeah.
So when did
They were
your
married a
parents
year.
get married?
They were married a year when she got.
They got married in
when
1917.
gave birth to her.
Now, your father didn't have to fight in World War I because that was right.
I have no answer for that.
Yeah.
The only thing I can figure out is they must not have had a draft or something because he never was in the World War I. That's all I know. Maybe when you got
because he was a
married.
farm laborer, but he got married. Oh, that's true. He
I
got
think
married
you-
in 1917.
I think you were exonerated or whatever the terminology
You
Or
is.
said his
exempt.
health wasn't
you were-
great, though,
Well, no,
right?
his health was fine then.
At that point in time?
1917.
The only thing I can figure is they got married,
So he
and
was-
I guess you were exempt. That's the word I was looking for.
He
Exempt
was
when you-
born in 1897, and your mom was born in 1894.
Hey, you're sharp, kiddo.
You said she was 3 years old.
Yeah, right. But that's exactly right. So anyway,
He's exactly 100 years older than Andy. 'Cause Andy was
yeah,
born in
that one.
1997.
Yeah. So Mother and Dad got well. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah.
So then they started dating and everything. And the other story that we always loved was Henry would say, I think he called her Celie. He'd say,
Oh, that's a cute
I
nickname.
don't remember word for word, but they would be clippity-clopping along, and he'd say something like, "I want you to marry me," or "Will you marry me?" or words to those effect. And she always thought it was a joke. Oh, Henry, you know, she whatever. Well, on the third time, now this obviously was all different dates, and so Henry said, Celia, this is the last time I'm going to ask you.
Stop.
That's
pushing me off.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is a
yeah.
joke one more time, and
So then Celia,
Oh, that's really
Celia
cute.
thought, gee, I better get serious, because she always was a fun person, always full of fun.
Yeah.
And so anyway, she said yes. And now you can imagine, and again, I thought of this much, much later, but you can imagine how Grandpa and Grandma felt. Because here's their oldest son, which they need, you know, again, I never thought of this when I
Support
was
the
younger.
family, yeah.
Never thought of this when I was younger. But then I thought, wow, you know, I guess they didn't want him to get married. He was only 20. And the oldest one, and the only boy, because the other son came along much later. So anyway, my father was not going to be deterred. So they just took off. And they went to Delaware, Wilmington, I think it's not
Sorry, I'm just trying to get
Dover,
the,
Dover, Delaware.
Dover, Delaware.
Dover, Delaware.
Trying to get the mic on.
Right, they went.
Sorry, Mom.
Oh,
Go ahead.
you
We're
mean
fine. We're
everything
fine.
I'm saying?
No, no, it all did. This is just a better mic.
Okay. Anyway, they went to Dover, Delaware, and got married. Just as Catholics. Much, much later, they had their marriage blessed by the church.
that's crazy.
But
They
initially they eloped. Now, apparently, he had been hearing good things about Danbury, Connecticut. There was work there, and of course, Connecticut, Maryland, that's a big gap. But he must have heard enough. He must have heard enough that he was impressed enough that he thought, let's go to Danbury,
So all your
Connecticut.
siblings were born in Danbury.
Yeah, yeah. So,
We just passed
Got
by
married.
there 2 days ago.
Saw the sign.
Mark pointed out the exit, Danbury, Connecticut.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, years went by, and by the time I came along, that was there's 14 years gap between Betty and myself, but that would be like 15 years later, whatever. Anyway, now my father, with not that much education, was self-taught in many, many ways. In fact, looking back, I'm just amazed at all the stuff he wanted to do. He was some industry called Clark Box Company in Danbury, Connecticut. He became a foreman in that area. And then other points, he worked in the hat factories. But he always wanted to have a business of his own. So he, way back in the 20s, obviously way before I was born, but he had a company called Hubbard's Photoshop. And he actually learned, this man taught himself everything. He just got books and learned how to develop film, and was in that business for a chunk of time. And I don't know how this actual sequence of time went, because that might have been later, but at any rate, at another point, he had the opportunity to start a laundry. Now, today you have automatic machines, but he had access to a barn, and somehow or other, the way Bob explained it to me, my father was able to go to another little town, and there was some sort of like commercial laundry equipment, tubs and everything. And however he came about and did this, at any rate, he rented a truck or whatever, but he actually, I'm sure he had help, he actually was able to transport all the necessary equipment, the big tubs and rollers, whatever you call them, brought it clear to this barn and set this up. It's called Hubbard's Laundry. He was Hubbard's everything. But again, he was always operating on a shoestring. So somebody pulled
Something would go wrong. And,
pulled the string and insisted that he pay more money than he could afford in order to keep this truck that he was using. So he did have this business for a while. Again, I wasn't born yet, so I'm just assuming. Although I heard some stories, which when I think back, wow, apparently there was like these big tubs that you use in these old-fashioned commercial laundries, and I was, 2 years old or something, 3 years old, and I guess I was kind of playing around there, And, you know, when I thought of it, oh my God, I could have been killed. You know, this little kid playing around on this equipment. But anyway, nothing happened.
Did he have the farm all the time during this, or did the farm only come later?
No, we rented forever and ever and ever. The farm was much, much later.
So he was working on these various endeavors full time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd started
Always,
laundry and
Henry Hubbard wanted to be his own business.
Yeah.
His
Because
own
Danbury,
boss.
I mean, you know, there's the big hat factory and
Oh, yeah.
things like that. That's
As a matter of
very-
fact, if you looked in the
Hat factory.
encyclopedia or whatever, yeah, it's like you would see Danbury, Connecticut was prominent for hat manufacturing.
Yeah, but he
Oh.
didn't work in it.
Oh, sure he did.
I thought
Oh, sure he did. Yeah, a lot.
But
A
he kept
lot.
trying to find other kinds of.
But see, I don't know what the
independent
time
jobs.
sequence was.
Yeah.
I just know that when I was little, that's where he worked in the hat factory. And I know at one point he worked in this company called Clark Box Factory, which they actually made boxes, cardboard boxes. So anyway, and then I was telling you about the
The laundry.
Keep talking.
Yeah, the laundry.
My
Yeah.
contact lens is hurting.
Oh,
I'll be
wow.
back in 10 seconds.
okay.
Did
Now,
your
at
mom
some
help out
point-
with that then? Was that like
My mother was
pitching in
always
together on
helping.
the-
My
the-
mother,
yeah.
she just was so
Yeah.
very dedicated to helping him out.
So it was family business then.
Oh yeah, it was always family in that sense. All right, now we've gotten up to the point where I'm just a little kid, and so I was aware of. Let's see, we lived in the one side of Danbury, and then eventually moved to the other side. You know, I guess it would be east and west. But anyway, so I'm trying to keep my thoughts together here.
What other kinds of jobs did he do?
Well, actually, I think mostly his money was made by working in the hat factory, because everybody was. That's what you did. Disney hats, they were called, which had nothing to do with Walt Disney, I'm sure, but worked in the hat factory.
Do you know what that was like? Did each person make the whole hat, or did each person do a little job and then pass it to the next person?
Probably because he
Assembly?
had the felt was there. I mean, I was never inside there, but all the equipment that like and it had to be equipment to make the round part of the hat, and then obviously they used felt and so forth. Now time went by, and in between, okay, we rented for a long time, and
The little house across from the church, the
yeah,
one you showed me,
right.
next door, or okay.
Right. I mean, I don't have the actual addresses memorized, but I do know that.
remember
Okay,
that.
we were renting a house on King Street, and I was in first grade, and I walked with my brother a mile down the road to a country school. Now, simultaneously,
Fast forward to a fairly
there was a landlord who had a little house in the back of the house that we rented. In fact, it was a double house. And my sister Betty fell in love with the landlord's grandson. That's my brother-in-law, Luke. And so this was just at the beginning of the Second World War. I think they got married in 1941. So that's, okay, that's the house that we rented there. Now, then, see, we rented 3 different places. We rented that place on King Street, and then, for whatever reasons, I don't quite remember, but, so my father rented another house, probably just about a mile down the same road. Now, here's the funny thing. If you ever heard of Little House on the Prairie, and if you ever heard of
Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Laura Ingalls Wilder,
One daughter.
and they had one daughter named Rose. Now, as a little kid, I had no idea, but come to find out, the house right next to the house we were renting was Rose Wilder Lane.
Now, you knew her as your neighbor. You just didn't
She
know
was
she
an
was
older
a famous
lady.
author.
Much like I would be now, and she was a lady in her 70s. But the thing is, Rose Wilder Lane, they never had children, or she and her husband, But she was a writer. And during the Vietnam War, she was an older lady. But she actually was like, I don't know if she, I think she literally went over to Vietnam as like an older person, like a journalist.
Of course, we are journalists.
Yeah, Rose Walder Lane. You could even read stuff about her.
And she was your neighbor.
She was my
essentially.
neighbor. All I knew was just an older lady.
Right,
That's all
sure.
I
You
knew. I
don't
mean,
know.
I'm a little
Yeah,
7-year-old
of
kid, you know.
course.
And I never even saw these stories.
Right. Were you a girl when somebody put a connection together for you? I mean,
No,
did you ever read
I
the
was
stories
an
as a girl?
adult when my kids became aware of,
And they
Oh, that's
what were they called again?
Little House on the Prairie.
Little House on the Prairie, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It would have been
yeah.
fun if you'd read them.
It is funny, yeah.
You know, she wrote herself, Rose Walder.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Actually, she was the
That's
more
what I said.
prolific
She was like
author,
Yeah.
and she was an author for a while, established
Yeah.
author.
Yep.
She got her mother to start writing.
She got her mother, yeah.
Her mother started writing in her 60s. Laura
Well, her
Ingalls.
mother actually
Oh,
had
that's
written
true.
as a newspaper. She
Yes,
had been a newspaper woman
absolutely.
for her local
Because
Missouri
I read a book
newspaper.
about that. Yeah, Laura, I
So
mean,
she had been sort of spinning
Laura
tales.
Ingalls was
Yeah.
always very talented
Yeah,
in writing.
Yeah.
And it was Apple Tree Farm or some name
There's
like that.
Yeah.
She lived to be 90,
She was-
I think.
Yeah, both she and
Yeah.
her husband. Her husband was 90 something when he
And
died.
Almanzo. And I love to read these, I mean, see them on television now. So anyway.
We need sometime we need to come out to Missouri. I mean, come out to Illinois. We could, although it's a bit of a ways in. Illinois is next to Missouri.
Right.
We could possibly see because that's where they have Paws Fiddle. They have the whole Laura Ingalls Wilder
Yeah.
museum in this where she
Right.
died in this farm, Missouri.
Exactly.
It was a real cute story. I guess Rose encouraged her to start writing these
Yeah,
down.
apparently so.
When she
Apparently
was in her
so.
60s.
Isn't that interesting?
And it was in the 1930s.
All backwards, yes.
Yeah. So she basically wanted to get her father's story. So she wrote, because the very first book, Little House in the Big Woods, is mostly a collection of stories
Mm-hmm.
that Paul would tell Mary and Laura. So it was just really, but it's very, very sweet. And supposedly she gave it to an editor who got so wrapped up in it, she missed her train exit.
Oh.
She just was completely wrapped up in this a charming book and immediately made her an offer and,
Yeah.
the whole publishing thing began with her. But it was kind of sweet.
Well,
It's like
apparently-
a J.K. Rowling story. It's like, well, this is great. We gotta publish it.
Well,
Who's
just,
gonna have your fairy
just
story?
adding to what you're saying there, Kathy, apparently Laura Ingalls Wilder was always a
Yeah.
confident lady.
Yeah,
As she
yeah.
got older and older, and I think even Almanzo, as he got older, got a little bit disabled. So she, yeah, she ran the farm and everything, and they apparently just had Rose.
Yeah, that's true. They only had. I think they had a baby boy who died.
Right. Now getting back to
Yeah.
me,
I want to get back.
getting back to me as this little girl, little
Yeah.
7-year-old girl, completely oblivious to all this, which I found out much, much later.
Your elder siblings knew. You told me that your older siblings knew that she was an author, Rose Wilder Lane.
Oh, well, I don't remember telling you that, but if I
You
told
told
you
me
that,
that they knew. Well, they were
Hey.
much older. They would have known. She was a well-known author.
Right.
They would've
Well,
known.
anyway, the point was I was still a kid in school, and it was the Second World War, and I can remember. I guess I was 12 when FDR died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Now, that wouldn't mean too much to you, but Franklin Roosevelt was the president from the time I was a baby. He
Sure.
became president in 32 when I was born, and he died 12 years later.
Yeah.
So that's the only one I ever knew. So anyway, then, all the mishmash of the Second World War, that
Well,
would take a long time to even...
No, but I have a specific question. Your brother Bob, at some
Right.
point your family got, your son is
Oh,
missing
sure.
in action.
Yes.
And he became a prisoner of war. Can
Right.
you tell a little bit about
Right.
your memories of your
Right.
family's worry or whatever?
Bob was 12 years older than I am. So that would mean if I was like 12, he'd be 20. So, well, let's back a little bit and see. 1945,
He was 24.
I was 13 when the war started, I think.
No, you were 13 when it ended.
Okay.
And I did it 45.
41, 32 to 41, I was 9.
Right, sorry. Right. Nine.
I was
And
9.
what year did this happen with him?
Probably, the war was from 41 to 45, so probably was 43.
And he
Where
was
was he?
Now, in the meantime, and I don't want to go into big details about this, but there's a book that's been written about prisoners of war in Switzerland, which I just found out about that, so I ordered it
That's
from
where he was?
Jane's the widow now of Bob.
Although Switzerland wasn't in the war.
Well, that was the thing. It was a neutral country. Okay, Bob went into the war, and
Pilot, right?
no, he was not a pilot, but he was a mechanic.
Okay.
He was in the war, and he was in France, and you know, all the logical places. And then I've heard different stories, versions of this, but apparently he was on a mail boat, a mail airplane, was delivering mail, and I didn't think that was the way it was, but then later I heard that this is how it really happened, that he had gone up in this plane, and they actually, now again, it's a neutral country, but according to this book, which we've just gotten, they would actually shoot down planes.
So they don't want them flying over their territory?
Yeah, even though it was theoretically a neutral country, but apparently, like all things in life, it got very involved politically, so to speak, so that there was a lot of, from what I read in this book, that Switzerland was neutral, but apparently they were kind of like friendly with the Germans.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and they would actually be do kinder things to the Germans, even though they were the enemy.
Certainly a lot of the Jewish treasures I know ended up in Swiss banks.
Yeah, yeah.
The Nazi ill-gotten gains.
Well, anyway, so then down goes my brother. I mean, the airplane and everything. Now,
The Swiss shot him down.
see, here's the thing I found out from the book. I heard that he just was able to escape, and it wasn't that hard. But now, after having read the book, it was hard. And he would have been if they had any escapees that they found in Switzerland, neutral Switzerland, they would be much tougher with them. They didn't have nice, simple little enclosure for a prison. Apparently, according to the book, they treated you a lot worse. They gave you a real serious prison for escaping from Switzerland. So anyway, having found that out much later, and always assuming that he was just kind of a cakewalk or something, he could just get right on. Anyway, so the thing was, we were given a telegram. Robert Hubbard is officially listed as missing in action, which could mean you're killed. And then, when he did escape, the reason that we didn't know it was because they were trying to keep all that hush-hush. The war was still on.
Secret intelligence.
Yeah, so we didn't immediately know it. And now I could be a little bit wrong on this, but it seemed like we only knew he was alive when he walks in the door. Yeah, now I might be wrong in that memory, but
What is the
A year
time
or
frame
two
between
later,
the
yeah.
letter and then you know he's alive? Was it months, a
Do you
year?
think he was dead for a year?
oh, it wasn't a letter,
or
it was a telegram. No, I think it was much shorter than that.
Oh, yeah, okay. There.
I really can't remember, but it wasn't. It was more like just a couple of months or something like that. At any rate, there he is, home, and he's got R&R, which are rest and relaxation and rest. Now, by then, they never did send him back, because by then it was, the war ended, I think, in June of '45. So, whenever precisely he came home, he might have come home at Christmas time or something. At any rate, he never went back.
So he was hiding out underground then in Switzerland and France, I suppose?
I don't think it was hiding out so much, but the way Bob always told us was that he just was with a couple of other guys, and they just walked down a road, and then came across some people. Now remember, during the war, there was like some sections that were Free France,
Right.
and then there was, okay,
Vichy
so they
France.
apparently guessed the right way to go or something, but anyway, he got into the safe area. And of course, from there, he just made contact with his unit, because he was in the Air Force. He was not a pilot, but he was in the Air Force. So he was ground crew, I guess you call it.
Now he married Jane pretty
Yeah,
soon
married.
after he got back, I think, didn't he?
No,
No,
because
he was older. That's
no,
right.
he was
an
older. He didn't get
guy.
married till 1950.
That's right. I
So that'd be 5 years after the war.
So that
So-
must have been a traumatic thing for you as a kid. That
Oh,
your
yeah.
brother was missing.
Oh,
Now,
sure.
did Dick fight too? Was he
No,
in it?
because
He was
he's much younger.
That's true.
He's only 3 years older than
Oh,
Mom.
that's
Yeah.
a good point.
Right.
That's a- yeah.
Florence is older than.
Right,
So-
exactly.
So Richard was only 15.
Richard
16
went to the
at
Air
that time.
Force, but not to go to war. He was he enlisted in Texas, and I think at that point Mabel, they were married, and I forget now why they were in Texas. But anyway, so Dick and Mabel. As a matter of fact, that's how they met. That's how they adopted Michael Hubbard, your nephew, your cousin.
In Asia.
Yeah, they were stationed in Japan. Went to, at some point, went to an orphanage, and here was this cute little boy, who is now my nephew, Michael Hubbard.
He was in his 50s now.
Yeah, just a little baby boy, or maybe a year old or something. But
So did you work? How old were you? And I might have been upstairs if I said this when the farm work started, when your dad started
Okay.
full-time farming. 'Cause you remember? I remember you telling
Yeah.
me stories of selling fruit and vegetables.
Right,
At your
right.
Hubbard farm stand.
Strawberry.
Right,
No,
exactly.
the blueberry hill, right? Isn't it blueberries?
yeah, well, that was simultaneous. We had
Yeah.
many acres of blueberries, which through the years when I was whatever teenager or something, we would hire. My dad would hire some kids, 12 years old or whatever, and he would bring them back and forth from Danbury to the farm, and then he'd pay them a certain amount for each whatever quart that they got. And then also we had advertisement in the newspaper. It was Hubbard everything. Hubbard's Photoshop, Hubbard's Laundry, Hubbard's Blueberry Farm,
Is there
and
a
then later
grocery store
Hubbard's
she-
Farm Market.
Yeah.
No, I
Her dad ran a store. at
Your
one
dad
point.
ran a store. No, I was thinking that you were confusing that with the California.
No,
I'm sorry. I
no.
apologize.
But
oh,
didn't
that's
your
totally
dad run
different.
it?
The
Yeah, no,
Certified
I know.
Growers of California, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Did your dad ran a store too, didn't he?
Not a store, a farm market.
Farm market.
Yeah.
Sorry.
In fact, that right after that is when he got sick.
Well, but how old were you when you moved to the blueberry farm?
Well, I guess it was about the same time as the beginning of the Second World War.
Okay. So
Yeah, I think they all happened
you
simultaneously.
were still pretty young.
In fact, it must have been about 1941 or something, because Betty, my oldest sister, was getting married. Simultaneously, Bob was joining the Air Force. So all of a sudden, Betty was going, Bob was going. And then we had the farm.
Did that change your life much? Did you like moving to a farm?
Well, it wasn't precisely moving to a farm. It was just a house that was available on a lot. Plus, it had a lot of acres. In other words, it wasn't a working farm. Now, my dad got there, and he actually built. There was a barn there already, but he decided, okay. During the Second World War, you have what was called Victory Gardens.
Yeah.
And also, if you could, which my dad decided to do, you bought a cow. Then you had,
fun.
in fact, he even had my brother Richard. That was his job to milk the cow. And he had pigs. Now, apparently, that was more just for the meat, because he had the pigs, and every year the sow, I guess is the terminology, she would get impregnated and have a litter of pigs. And I didn't know any of that stuff, because being a little kid they weren't going to tell me. But I did know that when
Drew,
she'd
the
have a
one-
litter, there was this routine where this butcher truck would actually come to the farm. And again, here I'm a little kid off somewhere else, but apparently that's what happened. When the little piglets were big enough, they were slaughtered. And then there was another place in Danbury that was like a frozen food market, frozen
Frozen meat lockers.
So that's how we did it. I had the milk from the cow and the meat from the pigs.
So you're partially sufficient, partially self-sufficient.
And
So the only thing you sold from the farm was blueberries? Or did
Oh,
he
yeah.
eventually do other stuff?
oh no, just the blueberries.
I remember you telling me there was some wreath or something at Christmas you guys would
Oh, completely forgot about that. See, again, when I was a little kid, my mother and dad were endlessly resourceful.
Yeah.
Endlessly resourceful.
Ways to make
So, yes, and so at Christmas time, they would make wreaths, sprays for the doors. In fact, my mother even had this wonderful thing where it was like these little gardens. It was like, you'd get a bowl, yay big, and then she would go to the woods, or however that, I don't know quite how that worked. There's something called a parchment, not parchment. Anyway, a little type of plant that's in the woods, and that would look very attractive. And then she'd even have like a little piece of a mirror in there, and it'd make a little woodland scene. And she would actually sell them.
Where'd she sell them? Did she sell them?
Back in those days, you could go to a Five and Dime, and you could talk to the manager, and you could say, "I've got some of these. I'll give you 10 of these." You know.
Right, for such and
That's
such.
exactly what they did. I mean, today it's a whole different world.
Well, she was always artistic, your mom.
My mom was everything.
Can you talk about your mom? Because I've
was-
only recently heard some things about you've only told me recently about your mother's
She's not, I mean,
personality.
I
She-
remember her being very warm and sweet and
She
kind,
was
but I never
very
really got to know her.
articulate, and she had a fantastic memory. I mean,
No, how would you
She
not
thinks-
remember her? She didn't die till you were 15.
Well, I never got to know her very well.
no. Well, it's harder when the woman is
Cecilia.
when the woman's older, and how.
The Foleys got to spend more time
Oh,
with
yeah.
her, and
Yeah.
and she lived with Richard, didn't she? Didn't she? Yeah, his tenant.
Yay!
That's great. Well, she lived in different places. She lived with
Yeah,
Betty.
she was-
Betty, not Florence so much.
Oh, okay.
Betty. She lived with Betty. And in fact, Betty and in fact, my mother and father lived with Betty for a while, and lived on their own for a while. In fact, the same farm that I'm describing as the Blueberry Farm, well, okay. The Blueberry Farm, eventually, we sold that when we went out to California. That's tying into when I met Leo. Wow. I mean, it's hard to get everything in. There's just so much.
It's just
But-
the things you find interesting.
Yeah, but it was just that at the same time that I was seeing Leo, and then that's when we went out west, and that's when we no longer had the farm because we sold it. Except that we did keep a lot of the acreage. So then later, I don't want to get
No,
out of context here. And I'm trying to think where I was so I don't get out of
Oh,
context
sorry.
here.
We were asking about teenage, growing up on the farm, and
Yeah. Okay. The open air market, that's when my father's health went down, and I was still in school. And simultaneously, that's when I met Leo, and we were going to go out
Rose.
west.
Rose is crying.
So when that decision was made, then Florence and I stayed out west, and that's, I married Leo. But my parents came back east, and they took this trailer that they had, and they put it on the acreage that was still on the farm. They sold the farm, but they kept a whole lot of
How long
acreage.
did they live there?
My father died in '68. But anyway, so when they came back after, they saw my wedding and participated in my wedding, and then came back east and everything, and then they lived there. And I kind of like, okay, then I guess until he died in '68, then they just did a variety of things. They spent time with Florence and Jim, Betty and Luke and all that. So,
I remember you telling me once that when your father's health started failing, that you started doing a lot of work around the farm market then to kind of keep.
well, that all kind of happened at the same time. We had a farm market, and yes, Florence and myself worked there and sold whatever you sell at the farm market, tomatoes and this and that and the other thing. But my father was not raising that stuff. But in those days, you never completely told everything like it was. So it was called Hubbard's Farm Market, although actually, in fact, he went out and bought the produce. But another...
It's a
He
farm
was
market.
enterprising.
It is a farm market.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
belongs
that's
to Hubbard,
retail. That's
so-
what retail is.
Right, and that's really...
He just wasn't wholesale.
And again, let's see, that would have been 19... Well, we went out west in 51. My father... I'm trying to think of all this. Okay, my father went south to get watermelons. And a combination of things happened that caused him to really seriously get sick. But anyway, so he took these long trips with this big truck that Bob had bought from the war surplus. And I think it was my other brother, Richard, and my father, Henry, that went south. That's when we encountered prejudice. Not for us, but I remember he came back and he said, this must have been the Ku Klux Klan, because he said they were minding their own business, planned to get watermelons, and someone asked him, are you with us?
Oh my God.
Are you with us?
Wow.
Well, he wasn't going to say no.
Why not? Who are you?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I guess there was a lot of stuff going on. Now, the actual civil rights movement started in the 60s. And my father died in 68. I don't remember exactly
So
what the
it's
time
even,
frame was.
Like, a little bit earlier.
But
so
there
it's
was a
like
lot of stuff.
54,
Yeah,
55, 56,
and there was a lot of scary stuff going on in the South. So
Wow.
anyway,
Those are the
Matter of
stories they
fact-
told you when they came back.
matter of fact, when we did make that switch trip, it was 1950. We went down. It was just before Christmas, and we spent Christmas with Bob and Jane, who had been called back to the reserves, and this would have been Christmas of 1950.
Where were they?
I think it's called the Panhandle of Florida. There's a Air Force base there. Like if you picture Florida, and right at the top there on the left, whatever
Yeah,
it
the
is.
Panhandle.
Maybe that's it. Yeah, so we spent that time. But Florence doesn't even remember this. But as soon as we got south, you started seeing signs of the poverty of the black people. And you saw whites only, colored, whites only. You saw signs. If you were colored, you couldn't go in a certain door. You couldn't even drink out of a certain fountain.
Right. So it's something
My
you just
sister doesn't remember that, but I remember it. It was 1950.
you remember it just as being disturbing, like 'cause you just never had seen anything like this. And
Well, growing up in Danbury, Connecticut, we had black people in our schools. As a matter of fact, they seemed almost like they were celebrities, because I could still remember this one gal. I mean, she was very popular, and so it's all over the lot. But yeah.
What are your most vivid thoughts about your parents' personalities growing up? Like, how
Yeah,
would you
okay, I've been
describe
focusing-
your mom's
right.
personality? And then your
My
dad's.
mother was, God rest her
No,
soul,
I'm
she
so
didn't
glad
really
you
like
fin-
housework that
I'm
much.
so glad you finally shared that with
It's
me.
passed
That's
on
what you
to her
just shared to
granddaughters.
me. I didn't know that.
She was a very ambitious person. She would do everything, but she wasn't that fond of
Well, she was
housework.
creative, right?
She was creative. She would grow a garden. She would do lots of things, but
She has shared that with
bottom of
many
her list.
women, I
That was the
think.
bottom of her list. Was she just wanted to be creative?
Exactly. Oh, that's so cute.
Yeah.
But you said that actually was difficult for you as a child because you felt a little
It was very
embarrassed. to have
painful
friends
for
over
me as a
that.
child because things would not look tidy, and I was always afraid that the school bus would stop. The school bus would break down, and the kids would have to go to house. But thinking back, my mother had so many wonderful qualities, and she was very talented. And to ask me, I remember sweet memories of, like, you don't get sick that often, but when you do, mothers, you all of us mothers, if we're good mothers, we're so loving to our children. And I remember that, you know.
Did she, a little bit more about her, I mean, did she like holidays? Was she, you know, extroverted, introverted? Did she like having company over? Was she
No, she
more of a
wasn't.
homebody?
No, we were more like a homebody.
Okay.
But she did have certain. Don't ask me why I remember this, but there was some lady named Ozzy Osbourne, and yeah, I know. Well, no, I guess Ozzy was just a nickname.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
other name in Osbourne.
Sure, sure.
They probably just called her Ozzy. But anyway, she and the husband were always good friends of my mother and dad, and they did things together. That poor lady, they didn't understand about Alzheimer's, I don't think, because that poor lady, they put her in a mental hospital. When really, now we understand things like that. But anyway, so my mother was just a very gregarious, loving, but within the family, not, I mean, she didn't run out and do things.
Did she do things with you children much?
Yeah, oh yeah,
What
yeah.
would she be like? What kinds of things did she do when you were little with you and your brothers and sisters that that you remember? I mean,
Well, again, I was the youngest, and there was this gap of ages. So mostly what I would remember would be more just like at my age. But you did make me remember something. Another one of the little ways they made money, again, they would do these Christmas wreaths, and then another season would come by, and there'd be all these violets. So you'd pick the violets and make a bouquet, and then you'd... It probably sounds silly now, but you stood on the street corner and you sold them. Sure.
Did you used to do that then?
Well, I was too little, but my brother and sister,
your brother and sisters
not-
would.
yeah,
So
just-
she'd
just-
make them, and then your.
I think actually my older sisters and brothers would make them, and there's probably a lot of stuff I haven't even thought of. But
My kids would love to do. I mean, they were always thinking, "Let's do a lemonade stand. Let's
There
sell
you go.
flowers. Let's do
yeah,
this."
right. But yeah, I'm sure there's lots of other things.
During the
But
Depression days, then all of these things,
see,
you
the
were coming up with all
Depression-
kinds of ways to make money by
possibly,
crafts.
but you know, I was just too young to comprehend the Depression.
You were about 7
Yeah,
when things got a
yeah,
lot better, which is
yeah,
pretty young.
Yeah, I think, I know that we never had excess money, but I know we did rent, and I know that the first house he ever bought was the one on King Street, and by then, I was already a teenager. So we were renting all those years.
Yeah, the difference between your kids selling a lemonade stand is they got to keep the money.
Yeah,
Whereas these,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
this
exactly.
was to help support the family. You know?
Exactly,
Was it a
exactly.
big deal when you bought the house? I mean, do you remember it as being like your parents being really excited they could buy a house, or is it not a big memory?
Yeah, I think it was. It was, yeah. You gotta realize, when you have a whole lifetime, there's a zillion things. But one other thing that came to me was my dad, when we were renting one place, he decided he was going to, there was an opportunity to take down a vacant house. So believe it or not, and I remember being there, he and my brothers took down a vacant house for the lumber.
And what they do with the lumber?
Well,
Your own sheds or
well,
what?
they had a truck, took it to this piece of land that he had, and time went by, and it was during the Second World War. Time went by, and he actually he built a small building, and we lived in it, with the idea that he was going to build a regular house. But then the opportunity came to buy the farm. That's why everything stopped. He thought, well, I'm going to take advantage of this, because during the Second World War, you could make a lot of money working in defense plants. So and you get bonuses and everything. So we were living temporarily in this small building, sort of like what would now be thought of as like a trailer, really. It's like shaped the same way. And then I can remember clearly he would go to Bridgeport, Connecticut, which I guess it was not that far, but it seemed pretty far. But anyway, yeah, defense plan. And he'd do all that. And that's when, but that's when the money was there to
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
Oh,
I was
but
trying. I was whispering so that you wouldn't stop talking,
Oh,
darling.
okay, but that's when the money finally showed up.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
bought
so
them.
goodbye to him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's fine. What did your mom look like?
Well, I have wonderful pictures at home, which I will show you.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
but
now
you describe
let's
her
make
in
a
your- in your
that's black
memory.
and
What do
white
you-
now,
what do
and
you
we don't.
think of?
You don't have any pictures in color from
Is she a
1945, 1950.
When I was a little kid, it seemed like my mother's hair was very dark. And then time went by, and then she got gray and got white. But it seemed, I know she'd have black hair, but it seemed like it was really dark. Yeah.
So she didn't have
Heavy,
red hair.
slender.
All short, round, skinny, apple cheeks, sallow
Um,
cheeks.
My mother was never fat. She was plump, maybe, but never fat.
Is he a strong kind of person?
Yeah. Physically strong?
Did she help
Not
around?
extraordinarily strong, but just,
Did she always wear dresses, or did she sometimes wear?
Back in those days, women, well, you wouldn't think of wearing jeans. Just like,
farm work.
apparently not. No. No.
Do you see her in an apron in your mind's eye?
Oh, sure.
Or do you see her?
And I'll tell you what else, and I've never done it, I never will do it, and that's, we had chickens. So my dad would have the chopping block,
Oh yeah.
and you chop the
And then
chicken's
she
head
actually
off,
had to pluck the.
and then you pluck.
Or did you kids pluck them?
Well, I was working with her, but it was like, seemed like you had to take a match and you singed.
That's after you get it all plucked,
Yeah.
and then you get those
Then
little
you-
hairs.
Yeah, then you take
That you.
the
You raise chickens
pin
too.
feathers or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I know,
open them up
I know.
and blah,
So,
like Santa Claus.
but I have one memory of, which now is apparently natural, but I didn't know that. But anyway, once you chop a chicken's head off,
Starts running.
it starts running.
Yep. I know, it's pretty freaky looking when you,
Yeah,
when you see
yeah.
it.
Oh, we had. So anyway, my mother, yeah, she, I always saw her as a very smart lady, and she had a rough time, she was not a full orphan, but she was a half orphan. Her mother died when she was like, whatever, 3 years old or 4. And she was raised by, I think that Cora would be her Aunt Cora would be her mother's sister. And so I was showing Mark this wonderful book from the husband, who was, their last name was White, Edmund White. So probably if I was to check my mother's school records in Brooklyn, I don't know if it would say Cornmuff or not, because that's her name, Cornmuff. But she might have been Cecilia White, because that was a name
Oh,
that
so
they.
her oh, okay.
I never did find
How do you
out.
spell Cornmuff?
Kornrump, which now that I'm older and wiser, I see them, especially in Lancaster, I see a million German names.
Right.
But as a little kid,
Right.
I was so embarrassed.
Wish you were glad you ducked that one.
Yes, and I can remember, in at St. Joe's School,
Yeah.
St. Joe's. I didn't went to a parochial school, but I had to go to the classes.
Religious education.
Religious education center. And I can remember all the kids sitting there. And what's your mother's maiden name?
Smith.
Cornmuff. What? Cornmuff. And now, I mean, it's ridiculous. But see, the thing is, okay, I was a little kid. A lot of like your little kids, her little kids, can have certain things that they're scared about, and maybe don't even share it with
Oh,
you.
sure. It's kind of.
Yeah.
Tell us about your dad. Oh, I wanted to ask about your dad. Were you closer to your mom or your dad? I mean, do you remember cuddling up, or were they just kind of two hard workers?
Oh, no. They were very sweet, but they weren't. My mother was always affectionate.
Aw.
Hugging was never. And my dad was just a sweet guy. Wonderful, sweet guy.
Did you hang out with them much when you were little?
No,
And-
he was just working. But I do remember stuff like he would take me to, at Christmas time, I would be the little one, so I'd go off to the woods with him and we'd pick partridge plants. I think that's what they're called, partridge, yeah. But they're pretty little plants with green leaves. Anyway, yeah, I remember that kind of stuff. Or sometimes we'd actually go out and cut down the Christmas tree.
big smiley guy? Did he smile a lot, or was he more serious?
No, I think he was just natural. In other words, whenever it was appropriate, he would be smiling.
Okay.
But, you know, he was the breadwinner. So, I mean, he knew that. And that's why when his health broke, and I was only, I guess I was still, 14, 15. And poor man.
It must have been so hard for
Poor
him.
man, yeah. And you know, later, I didn't understand it fully, but what he did was he worked really, really hard, took those trips down south, didn't get enough rest, which is a real no-no. Get your rest. Didn't get enough rest. And then he did something that, which really my sister insists is what gave him not emphysema, well, later emphysema, asthma, yeah. Anyway, the Disney factory had a different name, McDonald or McNamara or whatever. Anyway, it was a hat factory, and he was earning some extra dollars. He should never have done it, but it was like this big attic, and it was all dusty. And he says, "Well, I'll clean it up for you." And my sister insists that that's what he kept breathing all that stuff.
She might be right.
And she's right. She's
Yeah,
right.
breathing
Because he
loss.
started developing asthma really bad. He couldn't breathe. Oh, it was so scary.
Oh,
And,
I bet there was like insulation up there.
Oh,
as
sure.
well as
Probably all the most
fabric
horrible
dust.
things, yeah. And now they have OSHA, but they didn't have OSHA back then. So anyway,
sad.
yeah, his health broke, and I had asthma, and he got periodically, even when I got married in 1953, even before that, his health was always, you never knew. If he'd have a bad day, because when you have asthma, and then eventually he got emphysema, and that's what killed him. Yeah, the emphysema.
Did was he
was
your
only-
mother a smoker?
Not cigarette smoker, but he used to smoke cigars and a pipe.
Like at night, just every night, or?
I guess. I mean, I never paid attention, but
Nobody thought about it back then.
no, you didn't.
Yeah.
That's back in the 40s, and you didn't think about it. That was what you got for your dad. For Henry, we always got, it was easy. You knew what to buy him. You know what to buy him. You didn't buy him cigarettes, but you
Right.
bought him cigars. You bought him pipe
For his
tobacco.
first birthday or Christmas.
Yeah.
Tell me about Christmases and growing up in your
Ah.
house.
Mother and Dad, it was very important to make that special. So the tradition was they didn't even put the tree up until we were in bed. They didn't even
that
decorate.
was the standard.
They
didn't
did that when Jim and
Decorate.
Jim and Laura
That's
were
because
little,
I
right?
was imitating
That was
them.
the European way, though. That was always the count. I mean, that's Sound of Music. I mean, that was the traditional way you did it.
And
You
you
do
had to
Advent,
be,
you don't
all
put
the
up-
It's
kids
like,
had
it's
to,
like the
Right.
the angels or whoever comes
Exactly.
and decorates it at night when
yeah.
the kids are
So
asleep.
that's what Mother and Dad always did. So we'd wake up in the morning,
Oh, that must have been fun.
voila, there was a tree all decorated.
Was it
and-
candles in those days?
No, well, I don't know about when
No,
my
yeah,
father was
not
young, but
sure,
not.
sure.
And as far as the gifts, they were small gifts, but
Yeah.
hey, you loved them.
Did you go to mass? Was that?
I always made a point when Leo and I were together, we always, I'm jumping ahead here, but when Leo and I were together, and you were not born yet, but I guess you wouldn't even know this, Kathy, but anyway, Lori and Jim, they could tell you, because we had to eat breakfast.
I remember this.
We had to eat breakfast, of course, get all dressed up. We had to go to Mass.
Yeah, we went to Mass
Before
Christmas
you ate
morning.
breakfast.
Yeah,
right?
you're right. You're right.
Because
The
you
other way
have a
around.
fast.
First you went to Mass, then you came home, then you ate breakfast, and then you could
Yeah.
open your presents.
But do you remember
But
your
usually-
parents doing that though? Were your parents?
I know
devout
my
about going to
mother
Mass?
and Dad went to Mass.
Were they?
I have a little fuzzy memory. No, I know they went to Mass. I don't know whether it was precisely every single Sunday or how that all ended up.
Well, at some point I remember you telling me that Dad was more devout, and when you married him, like he
Yeah.
was more.
Oh, yeah. Leo was very devout. Yeah. Oh,
Because I
yeah.
So he
remember
was
growing
when
up,
you started
we
going.
said rosaries together.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
remember having
Oh,
to
yeah.
come in and playing playing outside.
yeah.
What was religion like in your home growing up? What did your parents teach you? And, What's their faith like? Are they Catholic or?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Well,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But was it just more kind of part of the culture, or was it something?
Well,
talked
let's put
about?
it this way. In those days, it seemed like you didn't talk about your faith.
Religion and politics, two things you don't talk about.
But I remember my mother telling me, this of course was much later, when this was much later after I had a family. And my dad, this was probably the last few years of his life. And she would make a point to say that the two of them would go to Mass, and it was just really hard for him to go up to communion because I guess his health, his emotional health started getting a little fuzzy. And he would get very emotional about anything like that.
He didn't feel that he was worthy, or
No, I don't know what it was, frankly. But he was just... Okay, when he had this health breakdown, it was pretty bad. He had like a nervous breakdown. He was in the hospital. He had pneumonia, double pneumonia, whatever, bronchitis or whatever. It was just awful. Yeah, it was just awful.
it was really sort of mark
The
your
poor man.
childhood. It's like before your dad got sick and after.
Exactly. Probably the same
And
way
how old
that...
were you when he got sick?
Well, let's see. The war ended in 1945, and
I like it. Like that.
I guess it was somewhere in the middle there.
I like it.
Probably 1948 or something like that is when his health was starting to get bad.
But that was right in the middle of your childhood, so
Oh, yeah,
really
yeah,
was a
yeah.
big demarcation.
It was tough because, I mean, for me, because
Well, 16.
I would come
48
home and
to
I'd
16.
be, come home from school and I'd be like 15 years old or something. And you knew that Dad was in the bedroom with the door shut, and I didn't want to go in there. Now, thinking back, that's what he exactly needed, was have people go in. But I was scared to go in there because I knew he was going through an emotional time. And my mother, I'd forgotten this, but my mother, somebody had to do something. So my mother got a job in a garment factory or something. And my brother would be going back and forth anyway for his work, so he would take her in. But again, these were like little snippets of your life.
Did he change towards you before and after he was sick?
Well, no, he was always a very loving guy. But
Oh, he was-
one thing that I remember this, and this was like, I guess, I don't know, maybe I already had Lori and already had Jim, and maybe Leo and I were living in Danbury. At one point, I needed a ride to go to the store or something, and I guess Mother and Dad lived